the featured speaker for this segment,
4 p.m. Eastern. I just want to correct myself.
yes, that is correct, is Professor Anthony Zunkas. And I saw your TED Talk, Anthony, on capitalism and the effects of capitalisms. And I wanted to have you come on, or we wanted to have you come on this summit and kind of talk about that. We want to make the case, and I think this segment is about making the case for why a strike is needed. So some segments will be about making the case. Some segments, like the last segment, was about strategies. The previous one was about learning from the past. This one is about making the case against or for a general strike. So, Anthony Zunkas, take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, Jay and Sharif and Alfani and everybody else. God, what an amazing panel. So, the Democrats are always talking about why we need to pay attention to the science. So I want to talk a little bit about the science of how capitalism affects us, right? So I did a TED Talk on this a few years ago. And one of the main points that struck me a few years ago was that the National Institutes of Health did a study. And they compared the brains of rich kids with the brains of poor kids. And what they found was that the brains of poor kids have been profoundly affected by the stress of being poor in a rich society, okay? And what it most affected, this stress, and in fact, some of these kids had brains that resembled that of adult stroke victims. These were like 9, 10, 11-year-old children living in chronic poverty and racism, many of them, because of inequality and because of capitalism. And the part of their brain responsible for judgment and advanced thinking and considering different concepts and ideas had literally been physically stressed to the point where it did not work as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to say that as much as I'm going to go over how capitalism damages us as humans, as a human species, I'm also going to talk about hope. Because if it was all just a story about how we're being harmed, but not how we can heal, it wouldn't be helpful. So we're going to talk about that too. There is hope. Here's the thing. We know that the most, the 10 most preventable causes of disease and death in the United States are stress-related and sometimes stress-induced. Things like heart disease, things like cancer, things like strokes. Yes, they have to do with lifestyle, but a lot has to do with our levels of stress because, we're animals. We have a stress response, just like all other animals do. And when our stress response is triggered, it's only supposed to go up for a short period of time. Think about when we were hunter-gatherers, we were being chased by a predator. So we needed to be able to get our heart rate up and our blood pressure up and get that going. So all these chemicals stream into our brain and our bodies to help us get away to a place of safety. But in evolution, that was only needed sometimes. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what is causing you stress. So it doesn't know if it's like a wild animal chasing you because it wants to eat you, or it does, or whether it's being afraid you're going to be fired from your job, or not being able to pay a bill, or facing eviction, like millions of families are right now. And what that does is it raises the level of those chemicals in our brains to the point where it becomes toxic to our brains. If you're a kid, kids' brains develop pretty quickly over a period of years. That their heads grow and they become real, and what's happening there is when the brain is developing and that stress is present, it becomes toxic. And, stress levels that go up for days, weeks, months, or years at a time can literally poison the parts of the brain responsible for communication, retrieving memories, socializing, right? And so all of this is known in science. It's not even controversial. if you're a kid living in Flint, Michigan, while the water crisis was at its worst, right? And you couldn't even turn on the faucet to boil water. You had to be careful about showering, right? You're living with stress every day. If you're a child of one of the millions of families facing eviction right now and worried that when you walk home from school, your belongings may be on the sidewalk and your parents may have no place for you to live, that stress is not the kind of stress where you're running away from a predator. That stress is lasting. It's lasting hour to hour, day to day, week to week, month to year. So kids growing up in an unequal society, those that face the most challenges are the ones that have the most stress. So, what we know is that because of capitalism, this stress exists in the working class, especially the working poor or the unemployed, on a daily basis. And it causes them, these kids are having problems succeeding in school. So when people say, well, if they would only study hard, lift themselves up by their bootstraps, they can get out of this cycle, that's not true, right? So again, the liberal left loves to, they're not even the left, all right? So let's not even use that word. The liberal democratic capitalist party, all those people love to, when it comes to the vaccines and everything, they love to hold up the science. That's great. Science will save us, and I'm all happy about it. But when it comes to capitalism, they disregard their own government's findings. So the Centers for Disease Control, which a lot on the liberal democratic side are holding up, right, when it comes to COVID, right? And that's good. We won't go there. So what they are doing is they're ignoring that the Centers for Disease Control did a study years ago, right? And it showed that the more trauma kids grow up with, the more likely they are to suffer from things like mental illness, depression, anxiety, suicidality, drug addiction. And it's because the way stress interacts with our brains, it literally changes the way that we are able to function and also interact with the world. This is also, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACEs study. The more pain and trauma that kids grow up with, the more their brains and bodies are challenged. It also increases the risk of getting sick or dying from the 10 most preventable causes of disease and death in the United States, right? Things like ischemic heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, even things that aren't deadly but can cause, that are life-changing, things like fibromyalgia, all those things. Asthma is more likely in kids who are growing up with trauma. And the original study that the CDC did looked at things like sexual abuse in the home, physical abuse in the home, addiction in the home. But it also noticed that kids that grew up in homes where there was an incarcerated family member had the same exact responses as kids that were being physically and sexually abused, right? We have a president right now in the White House who is the champion and author of what I call the psychotic white supremacist crime bill of 1994, which I believe is a tool of genocide to destroy the Black community in the United States. This was not an error in judgment. Oh no, a product of our times. This was a decision to warehouse Black bodies in prisons for the profit of white shareholders and CEOs, and to destroy any hope of a movement for liberation in the Black community, right? But think about this. It's not just a Black person being held in prison, an adult, a parent. What happens to their children? Well, the CDC, the very CDC that the liberals love to hold up when it comes to talking about COVID, says that that is one of the things that contributes to drug addiction, mental illness, and those with the most trauma in childhood actually die an average of 20 years younger than the rest of us. Why do you think the Black community in America has a lower life expectancy than white people do? Why do poor people have a lower life expectancy? You know what I'll tell you it's not? And this is the liberal answer to everything. Oh, it's the genes. we need to, it's the genes, there's something wrong with their genes. First of all, I will tell you that people who use that phrase don't even know how genes work. Genes work in conjunction with the environment. And when the environment is loving and supportive, and when the environment helps us reach our best potential, our genes express in a very positive way. But when our environments are threat-filled, are filled with otherism like racism or trauma, then our genes express in a very different way. What happens is our stress responses shoot up at the slightest thing. So you can see kids growing up with chronic poverty. If they're sitting in a classroom and a door, you know, those thick classroom doors, right? That door slams and makes a big noise. Kids who are dealing with stress on a daily basis, their stress response goes up and stays up for hours because of that, because it's been trained that way. So here's the thing. When your stress response goes up, the front of your brain responsible for advanced thinking doesn't work so well. In fact, that's actually a feature of evolution that's kept us alive, because when we're stressed out, we're not supposed to be thinking and pondering. We're supposed to be running the hell away from whatever it is that wants to eat us, right? So, but, you know, our stress systems evolved over hundreds of thousands of years before we were living in what we call modern society. They weren't meant to go up and stay up. You weren't meant to have like glucocorticoids, which is a chemical like cortisol coursing through your blood on a daily basis. So here's the thing. Science proves that hyper-competitive and unequal societies are literally toxic to the brain development of kids, and that can last a lifetime. So when people look at people who are quote unquote failing in a hyper-competitive capitalist economy, the first thing they do is they blame the individual for not trying harder. I heard Barack Obama in one of his first, maybe the second State of the Union that he did, talk about a young girl who might be a student in a classroom, and if only she would work harder. We need to support education. I agree, and that's what his point was. But we have to give her the tools to work harder without considering what growing up in a city like Baltimore can do to you, where the police are an occupying army, right? And Freddie Gray was murdered by that occupying army. Do you think that was his first interaction with the police? Freddie Gray's body and brain had been negatively affected by living under occupation, just like our comrades in Palestine are living under the occupation of apartheid, murderous Israel. And let me just say, I have friends who are Israeli. The Israeli country is filled with some people that are wonderful, and there is a huge peace movement in that country and justice movement that the U.S. media continues to ignore. But our comrades in Palestine, our comrades in Yemen, and in countries around the Middle East and in Africa, on the continent of Africa, are living under stress on a daily basis. Are they going to be murdered and executed by a soldier? Is a drone bomb going to fall on their house? In the United States, kids growing up in cities and towns where their parents are facing eviction, the electricity being shut off, not having enough food, they're living under the same amount of stress, and it is destroying their bodies and their brains. So this is the gaslighting of capitalism, because it says, oh, it's a meritocracy. If you succeed because you worked hard. Let me tell you, the poor are now and have always worked harder than the rich ever have. Okay, I have neighbors who are home healthcare workers who work far harder than Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or any of these clowns and thieves that we hold up as celebrities, right? Because the lives of poor people are stressful. And one thing to consider is, Humans only survived as a species because we cooperated with each other. This, again, not controversial, proved by science. Anthropologists know, because the human species banded together, we survived for 250 to 300,000 years. We beat out the Neanderthals. We beat out the other humanoid type of species out there. We won because we pulled together, right? We didn't evolve. We didn't have big, like, fangs or claws. We weren't very strong, and we couldn't outrun a lot of the predators that came after us. But what we could do was we banded together. So it is like branded into our DNA that we need to cooperate in order to survive. And what capitalism does is it very insidiously and very purposefully takes those bonds and breaks them apart, tries to isolate us, tries to push us into places where we are suspicious of each other. In the 1960s, they did a study and they asked Americans, do you agree with this statement? Most other people are trustworthy. More than 2/3 said yes. They repeated that study a little over 10 years ago, and that number was cut in half. We have been conditioned and brainwashed not to trust our neighbor. And why do you think that is? And here's the thing. The only thing that's going to save us, and it's not a pill that Big Pharma comes out with, it's going to be us joining in community with each other. And that's why I love the idea of a general strike, because it shows that working class solidarity is the way through, right? It's not that hard. And like, I know people like Nick and CJ and others are getting a whole bunch of...
What is referring to that
I don't know what happened. I just got a little... Somebody needs to mute. But I know that some of you have gotten a whole bunch of...
I think that's you. There we go.
Oh, okay. There's a lot going on at CJ's house. Good, right? So, but invite them all in. They should be there. We need to have solidarity. But you all have gotten a lot of heat for putting this summit together, and that's not a mistake, because the people who pay enemies of the working class like Hassan, like the Young Turks, the people who pay them, because they are paid assassins of a working class movement. And the people who pay them do not want us to come together. Do you remember the slave laws? They called them Negro laws, that Negroes could not come together and coalesce and speak to each other in the streets during slavery, the genocide known as slavery. You want to know why? They were afraid that people would talk and say, hey, there must be a way out of this. Let's join together. So white capitalism, white European capitalism, has always been terrified of the working class having even conversations with each other. And look, I'm born white, I'm born male, all this privilege heaped upon me for no reason at all. And so I have people say this, like, well, what right do you have to talk about this? Well, it's not about my right. It's about my responsibility, because all this privilege heaped upon me has been done on the blood and sweat of marginalized communities in this country. Capitalism is the vehicle, right? And I know there's all this talk about class reductionism and, versus racism. Here's the thing. Stop dividing us. You cannot have a conversation about capitalism in the United States without having a conversation about white supremacy, because the two are locked together. I live on Long Island right now, right? I've been in New York City. I live on Long Island right now. We are the 10th most segregated region, racially segregated region in the United States. We also have 4 of the richest communities in the United States. And those things aren't just coincidental. Extreme wealth and extreme poverty cannot exist in a country that is not a capitalist nation. So capitalism needs white supremacy. Well, it is white supremacy, but capitalism needs racism and segregation as a tool to separate the working class. Just like when years ago, when there were white indentured servants, what did the owner class do to prevent them from coalescing with black indentured servants? They said, oh, we're going to give you privileges. We're going to give you things.
Divide and conquer. That old strategy of divide and conquer. Anthony, I do want to bring in Kareem, the other resident doctor. And I just wanted to get before I go to the panel.
Sorry, I just want to let everyone know we got my man Kareem out of China, professor out of Hong Kong. Just for any new viewers, get background to him. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's just amazing. I think I just agree with pretty much everything Anthony every time says when I'm on the show with him. So I in 2019, I did a special issue for the Journal of Social Issues. For those of you who are interested also in your audience, called The Social Psychology of Neoliberalism, where I and academics around the world actually talk about this, how this system, and let's not forget, neoliberalism is not what you think. What it is in the how can you say that, in popular discourse? In popular discourse, especially in the United States, neoliberals means the Democrats. That's not the original meaning of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is simply said free market economics, free market capitalism, like the old school liberal capitalism that you already saw during colonial times. So that capitalist thinking, okay, has nested itself into our brains. Into such an extent that this whole idea of meritocracy, individualism, has nested itself so much into people's brain that many people actually blame themselves for their own crappy situation. Okay, just what Anthony just said, like genes that people have, for example, that when you see that black Americans, for example, are in a worse situation than, let's say, white Americans. Our system has this tendency to always blame the individual. So when you say genes, you can completely deny the structural boundaries people have and say, you know what, it's not the structural boundaries of continuous racism and unequal policies. No, it's the genes. It's the biology of black people that makes them deficient. Okay, and that is what capitalist thinking does, to such an extent that often people start to believe in their own inferiority. Okay, so we internalize that system, we become individualist, we become disconnected from each other. And the scary thing is about this whole internalization of our this capitalist system is that we start to believe in the idea that our value as human beings is based in the value in what we produce. Okay, so the idea that you are a valuable human being to society when you are a productive person. Okay, that's why people who don't have a job feel so terrible about themselves. Okay, it's not about what you can bring emotionally or with love or friendship. Forget about that. It's about what you produce in with regards to work. You know, like what can you produce for society in terms of labor? You know what I mean? And non-producing characteristics such as love and friendship are just not valued. And the final thing I wanted to add to what Anthony said is that the system, what we did a very interesting cross-cultural study with some international psychologists. And the interesting thing is actually what you see is that the more people internalize neoliberal beliefs of free market, individualist style capitalism, is that the more they endorse these beliefs, the more racist they become. It's a very interesting effect. Okay, so the more neoliberal, the more capitalist you think, the more racist you become. And the funny thing is also, people who endorse these capitalist beliefs also do not want to engage in collective action, like a general strike, for example. So the more you believe in that system of producing, of being this meritocracy, the less, or how can I say it in English, the less you believe in collective action or joining hands in social movements, because you just don't really believe in these structural boundaries. You think that most things are your individual responsibility. You know
And
what I
I
mean?
think, Kareem, I think that speaks to our, when I say our, I say leftist critiques of liberals. That's what you're speaking to there. But I do want to bring in the panel now. So, Afeni, I'll go to you first. Um, we preach about this on FHL all the time, but it is very unique to hear that there's actual diseases, conditions caused by capitalism. And at one point, before I pass it to Afeni, it's funny how capitalism causes these conditions and then they turn around and create the medication to help you cope with those same conditions that they created. That's funny. But let's bring in Afeni first here on the panel. What are your thoughts on just everything that has been said, capitalism, the effects on humans? A lot of these effects, Afeni, is what you see in the Black community, the high rates of anxiety, the PTS. Like, I literally believe that there's so many Black people in the community, especially these poorer communities, they're just walking around with PTSD. So many people. So, Afeni, what are your thoughts on everything that's been said so far?
Absolutely. Professor Zink has put it perfectly in his most scientific way possible. Capitalism is killing us. Capitalism is literally killing us. And when you look at, something just like the racial wealth gap, for example, capitalism is really killing Black people. The healthcare system is really killing Black people. All these things on top of being Black in America, all of these stresses on top of being Black in America, is like it's contributing to the genocide of our people. 46% of white folks that are under 35, their families own their homes. Like, those white families own their homes, compared to just 17% of Black families. The foundation is genuinely different. And everybody knows that home ownership is a very large component for a lot of families of wealth. And if you don't own your home, then you're just not financially stable as somebody who does. So, when we talk about all the effects of capitalism, we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about what it looks like to create a world that is truly equitable for all people that are in this country and on this planet. It was so beautifully put earlier. I heard somebody said, I feel like, I'm not sure if it was the other panel or this one, that said that this is an international movement. Like, absolutely. Like, the reason why we're talking about this is because it's not just about general strike in America. It's about being diplomats and creating coalitions internationally, because there are workers internationally that are being exploited by these colonial powers. There are countries internationally that are still being punished by some of these colonial powers for freeing themselves. Haiti, we're still, like, these are things that we are fighting for, not only in our country, but globally, because it's a global social movement. Kareem was right as well when he talked about how poverty is not an individual problem. Poverty is a policy choice in this country. People do not have to be homeless. People consciously choose every year when they are elected to use their vote to make sure they vote people can still be homeless. Like, they go to represent us, and yet we see all of these unhoused people. And guess what? 40% of people that are unhoused in this country are Black. So, like, we're having all these different conversations, but the conversation that we really, really need to be having is how important it is for mutual aid to be a part of this general strike, because it is the vehicle of all these social movements, because poverty is a policy choice. It is a collective policy choice that they are making and imposing on all of us. So we have to stand in solidarity with each other. We have to redistribute not only resources, but we have to redistribute education. It is not enough to sit up in your ivory tower and to raise $200,000 when you're not actually in the streets doing the work. It's not enough to do that, period. So, I think that as we have these conversations, as we talk about true equity, we really, really need to talk about how we can stand in solidarity with each other, how we can help each other, and actually care for each other in the ways that, we say that we want our government to do. We have to create the world that we want to live in, period. And the most beautiful thing that I can say about leftists is we can see all this shit that is going on in the world, all this negativity, all of this violence, and we can still see something better. We can still see that a path forward in which people don't have to be treated this way. A path forward in which nobody is homeless in the richest country in the world, where 46% of children are not food insecure if they live below the poverty line, because that was happening before COVID.
Right.
That was happening before COVID.
They're starving, and that's a great point. But they do a lot of things where they want to lessen the blow. You see the media, they'll say, "Oh, these kids are food insecure." They're starving because the system has failed them. So that's a great point, Afeni. Great point.
Yeah, let's bring in Josana, and the reason I want to bring you in at this part here is because you're able to see, you've seen neoliberalism internationally, like you know what it is in other countries, you know what it is here, and there was one conversation we had where you said something about to the effect that the U.S. empire is the reason capitalism is killing people all over the world, and that's who I'm here to take down. The U.S. empire. I remember that conversation. So what are your thoughts on this conversation about capitalism, the effects of capitalism? You've seen it in Brazil, what it's doing to the people, the indigenous people there, the poor poverty people there. So talk to that for our audience, Josana.
Thank you, CJ. I took note of some things that Professor said, and I will give a brief introduction. I'm from Brazil, and I grew up there. I was born and raised. We grew up in a way that, like, we couldn't buy yogurt. Buying a little cup of yogurt was like a luxury. It was like you were rich if you bought yogurt. And we couldn't sometimes afford to buy chicken in the supermarket. I'm not talking about organic goods. I'm just talking about like the chicken that's $2 in the tray, and we couldn't afford. So when I say that United States is the core of the imperialism, the capitalism that's killing the world, it's because in my vision as a foreigner, the United States is the core of white supremacy. And I believe that imperialism and capitalism are like arms and legs of white supremacy, because white supremacy needs to rely on these sources to exist. It's domination, and it imposes itself. It always been like that. You have the Crusades. People were traveling to impose religion. Oh, we're going to just bring them the truth, the word of God, and they were destroying culture and dominating. So yes, Brazil has been in the poverty map on the UN and the hunger map of the UN for many, many years. We had the government from 2002 to 2012, I think. 2013, when there was the coup d'etat against Dilma. We started with Lula, and then 2013 we stopped with Dilma. And now we have Bolsonaro, so we are back on these numbers. So I did grow up in a society that people died from starvation, and in places that, like, you have no resources and no jobs, and that's on the interest of this country. I was thinking, I wanted to ask the professors, especially Professor Zink, because he's here in the US, like, the don't trust your neighbor, it's more of a trait of the US culture, because even though we grew up with nothing, like we have no resources in Brazil, but we are in this philosophy, I have a sandwich, that's all I have in my hand, I'm going to give you half, because then both of us won't die from starvation. And here, when we come, like, as a person from this kind of culture, when I come and I'm open, I'm often received with, like, why are you so nice? You're hiding something. Nothing is for free. People say that nothing is for free. And it's impressive. It's mind-blowing, because, like, I remember the stories about the military government that was sponsored by the USA in the 70s in Brazil and the whole of South America. You have little stories about people that infiltrated the movement that was resisting the military government. Here in the US, you have people all the time doing that. Like in social media, like gossiping on Twitter, whatever, they all the time doing it. And it's impressive to me how an idea of egalitarian society where everybody has the same opportunities. I used to say, I'm not even asking you to be a socialist, just democracy, okay. Just create access, sorry, language barrier. Just creating access to the opportunities. This is not being a socialist. Like giving the same access to opportunity to everybody, it's one of the bases of capitalism, Illuminism, which is the beginning of it, because it gives everybody the same opportunity to start, and then you can go and compete. But that simple thought of everybody having the same opportunity, basic human rights, food, housing, education, healthcare, that is a threat for a whole system that exists. Is it like an idea that's so far away and needs to be defeated? Because I was raised, if I am an American, thinking that I need to win. I am the one that needs to get there by myself and win the Oscar. So I wanted to ask you, Professor, if you agree with me that this trait of the I don't trust my neighbor and I need to win is more of a United States personality trait of a culture.
Well, I believe it is. I think our culture was founded on this lie of rugged individualism, which doesn't work. I mean, even if you look at the original invaders, who we call colonialists, they did not survive because of individualism. They survived because they pulled their resources together. So it's always been a lie that's perpetuated. And, you know, Marx talked very well about this. The ideas of the ruling class become the ruling ideas. We just start taking things for granted, like, oh, we're living in this society where the only way you can get anywhere is if you individually work hard, succeed, or maybe are lucky with things, right? That's a lie. It's never been how humans have survived. The United States perpetuates it, and now, but you know, and with our imperial empire, we're trying to export that lie to the rest of the world, and we'll kill you to do it. To, you know, if you're not going to like get on board, we'll just kill you, and we'll blow up your town and your village. So that myth that we are individuals, our brains, our minds can't even be defined without looking at them in context with the communities that we're a part of. So, but you know, if you're wealthy, if you're a millionaire like Hassan or Cenk Uygur, the head of TYT, or of course Rachel Maddow, or any of these people, they're class loyalists with their own class. They do believe that they succeeded because they're really good at things. And let me tell you, this panel is way more talented, skilled, and aware and smart than Rachel Maddow or any of those people that I just mentioned. But they also have something that they don't have. You're actually telling the truth, and that's what makes you all so dangerous. But yeah, that individualism, it's just a bunch of bullshit. And we create a science to like back it up. Somebody said in the comments, you know, capitalism creates problems, then makes a pill to treat the problems, and then makes a pill to treat the side effects of the pill to treat the problems. It's just, you know, because you're defective. That's the whole message of capitalism. And it's insane, but we see through their bullshit. And again, they're terrified.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say let's move. Let's bring in somebody else. So go ahead if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah. So I want to say that I really appreciate what Professor Zenkus had brought to the discussion, because it shows how unserious, to quote Nick, it shows how unserious these conversations about capitalism are. Because if you look at the mainstream media, you look at the politicians talking about capitalism, they're like, oh, it's you know, isn't it great that you get to buy an iPhone and shit like that? But that is such a weird way to like try to boil down what capitalism is, when it's something that has such a huge, wide-reaching effect on everybody's life. To boil it down to, oh, you get to go to the store and buy some useless shit. Like, let's actually talk about how it affects people's lives. And I've seen it firsthand of similar to like what Professor Zinkis was saying about the stress that capitalism produces for workers and for poor people. It is unreal. It's the amount of trauma, and I know the word gets used a lot, but there's a lot of traumatic experiences that go along with being poor, and they have an effect on people's lives. Let me give you an example. So the other day I went to the store or something, and then there was somebody who was homeless, and he was trying to raise money. It was his daughter's birthday, and he like talked to some restaurant, and they were like, if they pay like $20 or $25 or something like that, they can they haven't. By the way, he was telling me that they haven't eaten really. They've been eating like crackers and peanut butter sandwiches for like a month, and if they talk to the restaurant owners, if they go to the restaurant and pay like $20 or something like that, they'll cover all their meals, and they'll give them like extra food to take home and stuff like that. And he said that he was trying to get money before. Originally, he was trying to get money for his daughter so that he could buy her a present. And she told him, don't even do that, because like if you're gonna spend money, why don't you just do something for the family? And it's just like shit like that is that doesn't leave a person. Like when you live like that, when you don't have anything, and then it's a hard experience to not have food to eat, to worry about if you're gonna have a place to sleep at night, or to worry about if you can afford your medicine, or to go to the doctor if you need it. Like that is extremely stressful, and it radicalizes people. We talk about
think of this unapologetic. Let me ask you this as a follow-up question to you. Like, think of how that child can't really experience childhood, because they have to say, no, Dad, don't think about me. Pay that bill. Like that, to me, like you said, is long lasting.
Yeah. And all the people who have to sleep in their cars, or don't even have a car to sleep in. And it's just like all those things, they compound. And I realize that back to like the whole hyper individualization that capitalism produces, like all of those that real life human suffering that's happening in everybody's community, that's people are just completely shut off to that. And it's not even like an intentional thing, but like you said, this is what the system produces. All people can be concerned about is, all right, I have to get up, I have to go to work, and I have to try to get as much money as I can to keep the lights on, put food on the table for my family. And it does something. And I hate to use the word because it's so overused that, like I said before, like at some point in my life, I woke up to how barbaric this whole system is, and how you really do have to shut off your humanity to even try to get through this. If you're like a poor worker in capitalism, you really have to shut off your humanity. And what the thing, like people think that we exist or we exist to just be a tool to make somebody money. That's basically what your waking existence is about. And I think that's so divorced from what humans should actually be like here on this planet doing, trying to grow themselves and spend time with their families, do what they love, what brings them enjoyment. All of those things aren't even a consideration anymore, because all anybody is worried about is just trying to keep a roof over their head. And it manifests in so many different ways. Like I said, with that little girl, even in anybody's personal life. So if you have a loss or something like that, I've many experienced many losses in my life. And what I've noticed is, even no matter how big the loss is, no matter how much it shakes you, and no matter how much you're supposed to, and what I like to do is to try to keep my humanity. If anytime somebody I know dies, I try to take some time to reflect and realize what that person brought to my life and what I can learn from it and what I could like carry on to make the world a better place, like in the image of like what they did. But most people don't even have the time to reflect like that when somebody dies. People die and they're at work the next day because they can't take time off.
Yeah, I can attest to that because it's terrible. That's the same thing my cousin's mom had to do, who got murdered, and it's that's the type of thing. Like, I'm a non-violent, but that's the type of thing that just infuriates me. That like you can't even have the time to grieve. You have people out in the streets trying to raise money for people that died. They don't have money to bury people. Like, to me, it's awful. But let's bring in Sharif because I want to make sure you get an opportunity to speak, Sharif, before we go back to everybody else.
And then, if you don't mind, Kareem can go after him because I know Kareem.
Yes, we're gonna loop back around, but I just want to make sure Sharif gets his first comments in, and then we'll loop back around. But go ahead, Sharif.
Yeah, this system is definitely inhumane. What Unapologetic just said about not being able to grieve or mourn or even go to a funeral, I've actually witnessed that firsthand. I had a coworker at a previous job. He wanted to take off from work because a loved one of his died, and believe it or not, the job asked him how close you are to that person. If that was me, I would have probably lost my job that day. I would have punched somebody in the face. Just real talk. But again, living in this system, that's what they do, and they also have these guidelines of like, if it's not your mom, if it's not your brother, it's not a close relative, you really can't get paid time off for that, which is ridiculous. What Dr. Zenkis just said speaks so true. Even in my own family, everything he was saying, I felt like he was just talking about me, because I know so many members of my family that has one of those conditions, or even died from one of those conditions. So it just speaks volume to why the working class or minorities in this country, we're constantly on the bottom or constantly pushed to be on the bottom, and why it's so difficult for us to actually work together, because it's so hard when you are stressed and overworked and you have so many anxieties and you have so many fears. You're not organizing. You're not even thinking about, building and being in community with others, because the system does such a good job at keeping you as a slave. And it speaks so true why it is so important to have a general strike summit, even more so. And I think this is probably the most effective panel discussion to talk about capitalism as a whole and how engrossed and how intrinsic it is into the system. And also to add, the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country is medical bankruptcy. So most people who are homeless is because they cannot afford their healthcare. Most of you guys know I'm a healthcare activist. And so, it's still a problem in this country that the most vulnerable, poor and black, brown people, can go to the doctor, and then you have to pay these medical debts, and then you have to decide, does your mom live or your loved one lives, and then ultimately you lose your house, and now you're in the street.
And that's capitalism, and is, I mean, to me, like, reasons for general strike, you can just list capitalism, and I'm a go, like I'm ready.
Right.
So, but I'm going to pass it to Nick for your comments, Nick, and then I'll let you take it back around the panel. I'm going to step out for the restroom break real quick, but I'll pass it to you, Nick, for your comments, and then sum this up, sir.
Yeah, it's all good. We're going to get Kareem in here as well, because there's so many good things that said on this panel. And I'll tell you guys, what I cover as a citizen journalist, my main focus is the class war, foreign policy, and state violence. So now the topic of the discussion is how capitalism affects humans. And what Zenkis and what Kareem outlined, and what you pretty much everyone in the panel outlined, was the trauma that capitalism brings. So people ask me why I embrace anti-capitalism, why I embrace Marxism, and why I embrace alternatives to this capitalist system. I have one question I just want to pose to you guys, and this goes to trauma as well. And I want to form an international leftist coalition, and I care about people internationally. Tell me one time where capitalism existed without slavery. Don't worry, I'll wait. Don't worry, I'll wait. So if you're a pro-worker, how could you prop up a system that cannot exist without slavery? So we talking about the trauma of children, right? We talking about Black Lives Matter, right? See this phone? You guys want to know why I resist the U.S. empire with every fiber of my being? Because I know that because I have these small luxuries, this is because of child slaves in the Congo. The clothes you are wearing is because of Southeast Asian child slaves. So if you embrace this system that cannot survive without slavery, that makes you complicit with white supremacy, period. So I'm sorry, I don't hedge like a lot of people do. That's why I can turn some people off. I'm not for everybody, because some people like to give people excuses for like supporting the Jim Crow system. Our system is such a joke that we have school lunch debt. We have kids that have to eat cold meals. I used to go through this as well growing up. This is the trauma. We talking about trauma, right? Imagine being around a group of your peers in line and you get called out and isolated because your parents do not make enough money to pay what should already be included in your taxes. This is the system you're proud of? This is the system you think we can eliminate with electoral politics? So when you talk about trauma, imagine that kid that's pointing out everyone else is eating great hot meals, whatever that is. They used to have this good chicken sandwich in my school. Tuesday, everyone was looking forward to it. But that Tuesday, when that chicken sandwich came out, and you had school lunch debt, this just adds up. Talking about schools, talking about education. We talk about how people develop. Why do they have police officers in schools? We're gonna talk about this more on our 10 demand panels. Because the police state, as we know it, is complicit with the class war. So if you are complicit with funding the police state or putting cops in schools that is designed to get young Black children used to the police state, the prison industrial complex system, it's designed for them to get used to the occupation of the police in their neighborhoods, right? This is just another system of capitalism. Why do they need people to go through this prison industrial complex system? Why did Kamala Harris was doing her best to prosecute Black men? Because she needs prison slave labor, which still goes on in this country. Tell me more about that 13th Amendment. Tell me more about it. Tell me more about your superior capitalist system. I got so much more to say from this panel because you guys, I got a lot of notes based on what you guys are saying. One last thing I want to say, and I want to pass it to Kareem. I want to mention something that Zenkis said, and I want to explain why we invite brilliant minds like Zenkis and these white allies, right? And I have been clear on this on day one. I like to spar with right wingers. I like to spar with people who are class. I should say they engage in the culture war on behalf of white identity politics because I think it's kind of fun. I think these people are intellectually lazy, and it's pretty easy to break apart their arguments. But I want to be clear here. It is not the job of disenfranchised communities, Black people, Indigenous, Latino, etc., to convince white people not to be racist. Stop pretending that racism is a Black issue. Racism is a white issue. So why do we have Zenkis on this show? You see how amazing he is to breaking down the contract between racism and capitalism. We need more people like that doing that. What instead of Zenkis and Kareem, what do we have in our elite academia? We got fucking Zionists. Dr. Cornel West was denied tenure in Harvard because he had the audacity of standing for Palestinian people. Sorry, I cut myself off there. I can go all day. Kareem, what's your thoughts?
No, I agree with everything you say, Nick. And I also wanted to jump into something that Unapologetic just said about that capitalism really puts your mind off you could say erodes almost empathy, because you have to work hard and you cannot focus on other people's suffering. But I would like to add that capitalism also willfully erodes empathy in people. Like when you internalize all these capitalist values, such as meritocracy, individualism, you start to blame yourself for your shit situation, but also other people. And don't forget, in capitalism, the ruling class has, you could almost say the capitalist system is one big fat propaganda machine for the ruling class. Okay, if you look at the media, and I'm not talking just the media in the United States, you guys, your media is influencing every country in the world. Why? Because they installed so-called democratic capitalist systems where your ruling class buys up the media and spreads the same rotten propaganda messages around the world as they do in the United States. So people are internalizing all that capitalist crap also in countries like Malaysia, India, you name it. And the thing is that we must understand that capitalism will never, ever work for the people for whom it was not made. Never. Capitalism will only work for the people by whom it was made. By whom was it made? White supremacist settler colonialists who were oppressing indigenous people all around the world up until today. Okay? And this horrible position that people classified as non-white are in is something that is undescribable, and our media system is so good at indoctrinating people with that capitalist nonsense and racism and racism is actually very helpful for capitalism, because it also erodes your empathy for people around the world. Why did nobody care that millions of Iraqis died during Bush's war on terror? Millions. But 12 people during a terrorist attack in France died, which is terrible, don't get me wrong. 12 people, but versus millions in Iraq, nobody cared, but 12 people died in an attack in France. And you had the whole world putting flags on their Facebook, French flags, and saying we are with the victims. This is what that propaganda system does. It erodes your empathy for those who suffer. Whether it's in the United States, people who are poor, or people who are of color, or whether it's around the world, Latin America, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. And this is the problem that we are facing as leftists. We are facing an incredibly powerful system that is being run by powerful capitalists, and that at the same time is indoctrinating us with our own inferiority, so to speak. You know what I mean? It completely erodes our humanity, and that is the purpose of this system. I wanted to add that to what Unapologetic just said.
Well said, Kareem. I want to get Zinkus back in here, and then we can go to Finney after Zinkus. You have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I got a couple of things. First of all, I have a big mouth, and but people need to know this. By the way, somebody called me a doctor. Thank you so much. I am not a doctor. I am a professor, not a doctor yet. But I will say this. I yell about the amazing research that people like Kareem do. Please read what he is putting out there, because what Kareem and others who are awake in the scientific community are doing is they are putting the research together behind the understanding and the awakening that neoliberalism, that capitalism is a scourge on humanity, and they're backing it up with science. So thank you so much, Kareem. So much love for you. A few years ago, there was a show. I don't know if it was Netflix or one of those. It was called The Man in the High Castle. And the whole premise of the show was, what if Nazis won the war? Guess what? Nazis won the fucking war, because Nazis run this country. People who believe in racial supremacy of white people are running this country. They are running the Democratic Party. Joe Biden, a psychotic white supremacist. Donald Trump, a psychotic white supremacist. Both of them racists, both of them rapists. And by the way, that is not a coincidence. So yeah, it's not science fiction to think, what if the Nazis won? You're living in that society right now, and you don't even know it. right? We're talking about white capitalist terror. When they strangle the life out of Eric Garner for no reason whatsoever on a, and I'm sorry, you know, trigger alert here, on a street corner in Staten Island in broad daylight, when they kneel on the back of George Floyd, when they murder and probably, let's just say murder at least Sandra Blonde, and I could go down the list, Kamani Gray, Freddie Gray, all these people, they are doing this on purpose. They being white supremacist neoliberal capitalists who use the police as soldiers to enforce terror in the working class and black communities. This is not a one-off. Kyle Rittenhouse isn't a one-off. He's working for the system. You don't think this is what happened in Nazi Germany? You don't know. I mean, people who study what Kristallnacht is, going around smashing windows, breaking the windows of the Jewish businesses, that's what they're doing to us every single day. And they're especially targeting black working class people because they want you not to step out of line, because they are terrified of what will happen when you do. Which brings me to the last piece, which is a general strike, which I fully support. Now, I just want to throw one idea out, and I hope this will get talked about in future sessions, which I'm so excited to hear today about general strikes. And that is, where do we start it? So I'm a veteran of the Occupy Wall Street movement. That started in a park in lower Manhattan, and it went global within 2 weeks. So how do we start a general strike? Answer, I don't know. But I wonder if we focus on cities and communities and we try to get it going in a few different places and strike the fear and terror into them. I envision people standing in front of the banking corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, maybe just 20 of us, maybe 30 of us, standing with signs that say on strike. What are you on strike against? The fucking system that kills people and strangles people, that allows the richest country in the world to have at least 1 in 5 children living in poverty and starvation. That's what we're on strike against. You're insane shit. If you've been in an abusive relationship, you know at some point you realize, my God, this has all been a lie. I'm imploring the people, working class people who are actually doing well right now, understand you're just a few paychecks away from where the most vulnerable are. And if you think they're not going to chew you up and spit you out in a heartbeat, you are dead wrong. Working class solidarity. Karl Marx didn't just talk about economics. Karl Marx talked about our relationship to ourselves and our community and others. Karl Marx was a genius, and that was his piece. It wasn't just about economics. It's about how we relate to society. Break the chains. Talk to people. You see a person who looks unhoused or homeless on the street. It's great if you can give them $1, but can you sit and have a conversation with them? Because I've done that, and it's affected my life.
Meanwhile, a lot of the dividers will say, oh, you can't talk to them. They may be a Trump supporter. This is the divide and conquer game that a lot of the people who criticize this summit will say. They're deplorables. What we should have the professional managerial class only lead the movement. This is the kind of stuff they really believe. That's another level of classism. I want to get Afeni in. I want to get your overall thoughts on the conversation thus far. Afeni?
Absolutely. You know, we talked about slavery earlier as far as capitalism not being able to survive without slavery. And I want to be very explicitly clear that capitalism within America cannot survive without slavery. Right now, you have people in California that are incarcerated that are fighting wildfires. And they cannot be a firefighter when they get out of prison. You have people right now, those same people are making California's license plates. Guess how much California charges? $23 per license plate. They have 27 million licensed drivers. You do the math. It's over $600 million in revenue off of slave labor. Businesses that are basically some of these businesses that are based in the United States of America use prisoners to make their draws. Victoria's Secret, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, this is everywhere. Slavery, especially in this country, is written into the Constitution. Literally. As soon as somebody is criminalized by the 13th Amendment, they're allowed to be a slave. Because, you know, that's their punishment. That's the type of society that we live in. So when we call for a general strike, it's because, yes, we know it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, we know that there are going to be certain infrastructures that might go out. They might cut the damn power out on us, y'all. You don't know what the fuck they could do, depending on how long this shit lasts. Let's be very clear. But it's about knowing that there's a better way on the other side of this shit. Going back to my mutual aid thing, you know what I'm saying? I'm always saying that mutual aid is the vehicle to all social movements. And it's very important that we set up mutual aid funds. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous that the U.S. has the highest infant mortality rate of any developed country. And Black women also die 3 times more than white women on delivery tables. So talk about genocide. We're not just talking about the police shooting our boys in the street. We're not just talking about, you know, the fact that we live in society, that a majority of us live in societies and in neighborhoods where it is literally, you're in survival mode. You are operating at the lowest vibrational point, and you see your brother as your enemy, when at the end of the day, the enemy is that motherfucker with that badge. The enemy is all the people with those higher degrees that come into your neighborhoods and sell off your houses. But because they're on survival mode, they can't see that. So our brothers are shooting each other. They shooting kids out here in DC. We are not well. We are not well. So when we talk about mutual aid, we're talking about, if you're a licensed therapist and you have a practice, or you know, and you have other friends that have practices, talk to your friends about doing free mental health services in lower income neighborhoods. Free, because those kids need it. That's mutual aid. You see what I'm saying? When we talk about, you know, mutual aid being the vehicle to social movements, we think about the ACT UP movement. They have medical clinics set up for gay people specifically. You think about the Young Lords, you think about the Black Panther parties. They had medical clinics, acupuncture set on. They were curing anxiety. They were treating people that had drug addiction. And they had free breakfast programs. You want to talk about something? The only reason why the United States of America has free breakfast in this country is because the Black Panther Party. Period. That's mutual aid. So when we talk about where to start by looking around your community and seeing where you can help. If there are disabled people in your community that are relying on Amazon to get their things delivered to them, maybe you should go knock on their door and see if you can do store runs to them. You go to the fucking grocery store for yourself so you can take their list with you. But that's where it starts. We have to start actually building community. And I feel like because there are so many people that are so hell-bent on electoralism, cool, be an electoralist, but stand in solidarity with the folks that don't want to do that shit. Stand in solidarity with the people that are fighting for the same exact things you say you're fighting for, that are willing to take more actionable steps to get there. Because we can't wait. We can no longer wait. So the whole point of the general strike is to start to put a fire under their ass, because they've already been putting fires under our asses for the past 400 years if you're Black, and for the past 100 and some years if you're white and working class. So I mean, I don't know, y'all. If you're still apprehensive, or if you're still trying to figure out where you can start, just know that it starts by helping in your neighborhood. It starts with you locally radicalizing your friends. That's where it starts.